Hey gang, I'm back, and now what we need to do is prevent that default behavior that I was preventing in the previous tutorial, but just not sufficiently. You can see the default behavior when you drag an image over is to open up a new tab with that image as the URL. But we can prevent that, and I'm just going to say here I'm going to make a reference to a JavaScript file, app.js, which I'm going to make here, and we'll say app.js. And now in here, I can say window dot add event listener, and I'll say whenever there's anything dragged over, I want to take that event and I want to e.prevent default. And you saw in my previous video, I also there's a thing you can do for completeness, which you can say e could be e or event. Not really necessary in this day and age. And let's see, I need a comma there. And you can see my code editor is even saying I don't really need that. So you might see that though in around, and that's what that's doing. And so I'm just gonna take this event and I'm also gonna copy it. And so on the window, we're also gonna prevent the default behavior on drop. And now that should prevent that anywhere in the window, which is great. Now, what I'm going to do though is also on the drop, I'm going to add an event listener. And so this will be for the drop zone. And we'll say drop, and we'll say E. And here again, I can say prevent default, just for the sake of completeness. But you can see we need also to get a reference to this drop. So I'm going to put that up here, and I'm going to say const drop. Let's go to the document and look for an ID of drop. So now anything that comes in to my drop zone should get handled. If I say e.target, I should be able to see that console.logged. And there we go. So now it's showing me my target. And what we need to get from this drop zone is actually a file. So what I'm going to do is from that event on the drop zone, I should also get a thing called e.data transfer. And let's just log that out. And you can see I get a data transfer object. And this data transfer object also has a thing called files. And even though it does have an array of list 1, if I look at data transfer dot files at 0, I should see my file. And there we go. I get the name, last modified, and the size, and it's a reference to that file. So what I can do with that is I can, first of all, let's make a constant named file, and we'll set that equal to e.dataTransfer.files at 0. And And I'm going to set one. I'm going to get file size. And file size will be file.size. Oops. Will be file.size. And let's just log that out. Console.log file size. And we'll see when I drag this over. Get rid of this first console.log. Oops, don't want to get rid of that line. And drag this same thing over here. And you can see I get this number 1513461. And you can see that's the number of megabytes, which is too big. We want to limit everything to be less than 1 megabyte, just to keep things easy on our backend when we get to the Firebase part. So what I'll say is file size, let's set file size equal to, we'll convert it to megabytes by that's the number in bytes, and if we want to convert it to megabytes, we have to divide it by 1024 squared, which is what we're doing here. And now we'll see if I log that out, I'll get 1.44, and that's the number of megabytes, which is pretty close. I'm not sure what the discrepancy is there between 1.44 and 1.5, but let's just call it a rounding error. And now, in order to actually get the file data, I need to use a thing called a file reader. And file reader is part of the web API, and it is what we can use to load in a file. And you can see we get a file reader.result, which will be the file's contents, which we're going to use. And we can also get various methods or messages about where it's at. And we can also get a data URL. And so we can use that data URL to display the file. So the first step here is just going to be const, we'll make a reader, and that's going to be a new file reader. So we're going to make a new object, a new file reader object. I'll get rid of this console.log so we don't have too much information. And now on the reader itself, I'm going to add an event listener. And this listener is going to be for this load message right here. So when the load message happens, the load message will fire when the read has completed successfully. That load, we'll wait for that load message. And when that load message happens, we'll run this function here. And this function here is going to take the result of that message, and we're going to use that result to call a function called add to gallery. And we'll add to gallery the file URL. And we'll also have a little message down here. We'll say if file, first thing we'll do is we'll say if the file size is greater than 1, send to the browser an alert message that says file must be smaller than 1 megabyte. And otherwise, if it is the right size, then we're gonna start this loading process that we're listening for the completion of. And we'll say reader dot read as data data URL. Sometimes these autocompleters are not helpful. And we'll pass in that thing we got before, which is the file. So that's going to start in process the event that we're already listening for. So now I'm going to display that in the gallery. And I'm going to write a function called add to gallery. And it's going to take in a URL, and we're going to use that URL in an image tag. But first, let's just console.log URL and make sure this is working the way we hope it will. So I'll go back to my image gallery. Same file. Must be smaller than 1 megabyte. Very helpful. And I'll just take this one, which is small, and you can see it did. It gave me this file back. It gave me the file in its entirety, and it gave me it gave me all that data. So that's kind of like load image, and the next thing we're going to do is display that image. And to do that, we're going to create a div. And we're going to say const new div. We'll say new gallery item equals create a document dot create element, and it's going to be of a type div, and then we'll say for this div we'll say div dot class name equals image item, which was the style that I defined here. Image item. And we'll say const image element equals document dot create element, and that's going to be of a type image. I'll say image dot source equals URL, and I think I goofed here, but we'll just keep going. We'll say div dot, we'll say new gallery item dot append child, and we'll append the image element, and then I'm gonna also get a reference to the gallery up here, and I'll say const gallery equals document dot query selector with the ID of gallery, and I'll say gallery dot append child new gallery item, and we'll see what happens here. Div is not defined at 35. Yeah, right. New gallery item dot class name. Image is not defined. Right. Image element. And now there we go. So we're showing up in the gallery here, and we've got our drag and drop happening. We're reading in our data. It's all going swimmingly. And then the next step is to wire this up to Firebase, which I'll do in the next video. So what we're going to do is when this drop event happens, instead of adding it directly to the gallery, we're going to add it to Firebase Firestore. So we're going to need to do a little bit of setup, and I'll do that setup in the next video. I'm going to set up a new Firebase app and get things started. So